Hi, I'm Will Evans with the Murray County Chamber and Economic Alliance. Part of our mission as an organization is to advocate for our members as well as keep them informed, along with the general public, candidates during our elections. With recent events this year, we have had to move some of our forums to a virtual platform. So we have created our state candidate virtual forum to help keep everybody up to date. As part of this series, I am here today with District 69 House candidate Michael Curcio. How are you doing today, Michael?
Great, Will. Thanks for having me.
Great, great. Yeah, thank you for spending some time with us today. So we've got some questions here we'll go through, and that may spur some additional comments or questions, and we'll kind of take it from there. So let's start. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, why you were running in the 69th District.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. So again, my name is Michael Curcio. I actually live right in downtown Dixon, Tennessee, and represent the 69th House District of Tennessee currently. So I'm the incumbent candidate, and the district includes the western half of Dixon County, all of Hickman County, and then a portion of Murray County that is between Williamsport and Hampshire, if you will. So Hampshire Pike and Williamsport Pike are the southern and the northernmost boundaries of the Murray County portion of the district. And then it creates a wedge that goes all the way to the square in Columbia and also encompasses the College Hill precinct, which is kind of from that direction, sort of on the back side or the east side of the square. And so I've been the state representative for that district, for the 69th district, since being elected in 2016. So this is the end of my second term. And I'm running for re-election because there's really no higher honor than being able to serve the community that raised you, so to speak. And so as a lifelong resident of the 69th district, it is very rewarding every day to get up, go to work to serve folks just like myself. And so that's what I tell people, is that I try to serve in a way that I would want to be served if I was just a average Joe citizen and we're voting in this election. So we've tried to do that. My wife and I have 3 children under the age of 9. My wife's a public school teacher in the Dixon County Public Schools. And what I do for my day job, so to speak, is I'm in the insurance business. So I'm a health insurance broker and do employee benefit management for companies. So that's what kind of keeps me busy during the day. And I also think that's important to have somebody with a business background or, kind of a real life, background coming into the General Assembly, because we've ultimately got to live and work under the same laws that we pass for ourselves. So that's why I'm running, and it's been an honor to serve thus far. And if I'm granted the blessing of being able to go back in January, I look forward to continuing to do that for the citizens of Murray County.
Great. Well, thank you for that. You touched on it a little bit, talking about your experience as a health insurance broker, but additionally, what experience or qualifications do you feel you have that make you the optimal candidate for this position?
Sure. Thank you. When I first ran, the district was in a unique position. If you look at kind of how we're structured, the 69th district kind of hugs that 840 corridor, if you will. And this is the area that's really experiencing a lot of growth coming out of Nashville, as Nashville has become, the it city now for a number of years. Folks are moving out, seeking more of those authentic experiences, looking for that hometown feel. That's exactly what Columbia, Centerville, Dixon offer to folks. And so I meet people every day who are moving here from someplace else. Maybe they've started out in Nashville and they've migrated south or west, or maybe they've moved here from a totally different state. And so we really needed someone sitting at the leadership table. And I, when I first ran and was elected in 2016, I felt like I brought that skill set to the table. And then continuing forward, being that leadership voice for our community, I think has been very important. So I've certainly got the experience and the skill set to do that. Have maintained very good relationships, not only with the previous governor's administration, but the current governor's administration. Been able to advocate very successfully for our district. And one of those things specifically, while it didn't affect Murray County, it was a huge milestone win for our district, which was for the first time since 1989, I was able to create a new judicial district in Tennessee. So a lot of people don't realize that judicial districts are completely different from legislative districts, and was able to advocate to split up what used to be Williamson, Hickman, Lewis, and Perry as one large judicial district. was able to create the newly created 32nd Judicial District, which is just Hickman, Lewis, and Perry, and Williamson now being a standalone district on its own. Those more rural communities being lumped in with Williamson County, which we all know has grown in dynamic ways over the last several years, didn't make a ton of sense. And so being able to split that out not only help those communities and will help those communities thrive, but I think is also a testament to my ability to work across the aisle with the executive branch and with any number of folks across the state who are not in the General Assembly or members of the executive branch, folks like, judges, DAs, assistant DAs, the Public Defenders Conference and so forth to really advocate for those needs. So having that experience, I think, is invaluable as we look to new development projects in Maury County. And so, taking that experience and extrapolating that on any number of local issues for Maury County, I think will be critical. And then touching on the business piece again, being in the industry that I am, I get to see a lot of different businesses and how they function. And so when you're working in HR consulting and employee benefit management, we've got hundreds of groups under management in multiple states, everything from 2-person mom and pops up to our largest employer can have several hundred, if not a couple of thousand employees. So getting to see the way different business owners operate their businesses, what the back office looks like, and understanding how government interference or non-government interference helps them thrive and hire new workers and so forth, I think is invaluable experience to bring to the table as well.
Great, thank you. Getting into a few specific questions and topics here. First, we'll talk about broadband, access to broadband. I think that's been a big topic over the last several years, the legislature, and that's only been accelerated more over the last year with more people having to work remotely and participate in education remotely. What actions do you see necessary to kind of continue providing additional resources for those who may not have access to broadband currently?
Sure. So first of all, if you weren't sure that broadband was a necessity prior to 2020, I think everybody's off the fence now. I think people realize that this has really become a modern utility. It's become something that is not a luxury. Now, sure, if you're retired and you don't want access to broadband, or if you're a family that for some reason you don't want it, that's certainly fine. We don't want to force it on anybody, but for most folks who are either trying to educate a child now in a virtual learning environment, or having to spend at least some time working remotely because they've been quarantined or they've been contact traced or something like that, or they're just part of the modern economy that says we don't have to have a brick and mortar office to do what we do, then obviously access to high-speed broadband internet is a huge piece of that. So when I was first elected in 2016, we had the Rural Broadband Accessibility Act, which I was proud to co-sponsor. It was a huge issue in my first campaign and continued to be. And so I was proud to be able to stand in the well and support that piece of legislation, which enabled rural electric cooperatives to get into the broadband business if they wanted to, if they felt like that fit their core competency and that they could do that while still maintaining reliable electric power. Because it's easy for us who are not in that industry to kind of throw stones and say, well, why don't you want to get into this? And I was really heartened to kind of take a sidebar to hear the executives from those rural electric cooperatives say, we want this just as bad as our customers want it, but not at the expense of providing a cost-efficient, reliable power source. And so they were very careful not to get over their skis, so to speak, and to jump into something that was really going to alienate their core competency. But I think you've seen now, fast forward a couple of years, Duck River Electric Cooperative, which operates in my district, also Meriwether Lewis Electric Cooperative, which serves most of Hickman County, not all of it, but most of it. And then over in Dixon County, we've got Dixon Electric, which they're not a cooperative, and they were not prohibited from getting into the broadband business to begin with. They're doing their kind of local surveys and planning on the ground to see what they feel like their take rate would be. But across the 69th district now, you're seeing more and more access coming alive. In again, where Meriwether Lewis Electric Cooperative is, they're committed to having all of their power customers hooked up on a certain schedule. So they're on task now to get everybody that's in their service network hooked up to high-speed broadband. And so that continues to be a huge necessity. The state did what we did with the Rural Broadband Accessibility Act. That kind of helped give folks a leg up to now reach to these federal grants that are administered through, I believe it's the FDA. And so folks like Duck River, MLEC, and others are able to then draw down federal dollars to match with the state dollars that we have to help and grant access really to even the most remote and rural parts of my district. And it's that last mile that's really the toughest. Anybody who's looked at this, creating the basic infrastructure is not typically the hardest part. The hardest part is how do you get from that last mile to somebody's front porch? And that's what is really cost prohibitive, because if you think about what that one customer is going to generate as far as profit for a company, it's not enough to offset having to trench that line and so forth. And that's where the cooperative model comes in very, very well. There are parts of our country that still wouldn't have electric power, even in 2020, if it weren't for the cooperative system, because it doesn't always cash flow to take power, and in this case, to take broadband to every single house or community across the country. And so this is where that kind of public-private partnership that we've been able to strike a balance on in the state of Tennessee is very, very helpful.
Great, thank you. Continuing on the topic of COVID, just for a couple more questions. You're starting to hear some reports coming out and conversation around potential learning gaps and delays among students as a result of having to kind of quickly pivot to remote learning. How do you feel the legislature, could address the gaps and shortfalls of the academic achievement our students have suffered?
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge. As I mentioned before, my wife's a public school teacher. Our children are in the school where my wife teaches. So we've opted to go in person. If my wife was going to need to be there in person, we felt comfortable having our three children there in person as well. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is a broadening of the gaps that really already existed there. And so as with everything else in K through 12 learning, parental involvement has a lot to do with it, how much your parents are able to make sure that you do put in the work and do the work that's required to be able to learn. That's true whether they're dropping you off at school every morning. It's certainly true if you're trying to do it at home around the kitchen table. And so unfortunately, what I fear and what I think we're starting to see is that an increasing divide between those kind of haves and have-nots. And that doesn't necessarily fall down along economic lines. It's really more about whether or not you've got parental involvement in those households. And that's what's been really, really hard to watch. The other thing that we're seeing, I think conventional wisdom said that a lot of the kids that would remote learn would be kids that had access to high quality internet, that had a parent who could stay home and help kind of coach them through the academic process. That's, in my kind of naivete, that's who I thought would have been a great candidate for remote learning. Unfortunately, what we've seen as we talk with DCS and so forth is that a lot of the kids who've been kept out of school are from those families that maybe a teacher was reporting, abuse or neglect or other issues. And in a way to avoid that interaction, they're just keeping the child home now so that those things are not being reported, which should trouble all of us and is very, very frightening. So the legislatures looked at a couple of different options. There was a proposal actually by the executive branch, so it was not driven out of the legislature, but there was a proposal by the executive branch to be able to do kind of child wellness checks and those kinds of things. That kind of fell flat because of the way the rollout went forward. It was more of a, we're going to go check, every child's household. So I think striking a balance between, kids where we know there's been problems in the past, or maybe if they're not performing well through online learning, being able to have some checks and balances on that without kind of lumping everybody into one big category. But we're also starting to hear now, again, through my wife's interaction at school, parents presenting and saying, hey, we thought remote learning was going to work for us, but it's not working for us. We need to get our kids back in the classroom. And so, maybe loosening some of those guidelines to allow kids to come back in, even if they had chosen remote to begin with, would be good. But a lot of that has been left up to the school boards and the LEAs themselves. So, I look forward to seeing kind of what comes down the pike, so to speak, in January on that. But I know there's been, we're all learning. We're all seeing this for the first time. What I hope the positive can come out of this is that as somebody who's a huge proponent in allowing, students and parents to choose how they want to educate their children, maybe this is going to open up some new horizons where kids can do more flexible remote learning if there's a work study opportunity or something like that, especially as you get into the high school grades, to help have our kids more prepared for career and college readiness. So while this has been a challenge, I hope sometimes when you get thrown in the deep end, you learn to swim quickly. And so I hope we can really see some positive come out of this, which is to get much more comfortable with remote learning and flex learning, if that's to the benefit of that student.
Great. Okay. Thank you. One last COVID-related question. Obviously, that's on the forefront of everybody's mind still. But locally, and I think looking at the state, we have seen our economy impacted. May not quite have been what we were expecting going into this. Some businesses have managed to do very well, but some do struggle early on, and some are maybe even just now beginning to kind of struggle as we're getting into the 7th or 8th month of this, and maybe even close as a result. What do you think the legislature could do, or what would your plan to be to help continue the economic recovery efforts in our district?
Yeah, so first and foremost, what the legislature has tried to do over the years is to remain self-sufficient. And so if we run our affairs conservatively and don't bite off more than we can chew, then we don't have to pass on onerous tax burdens to our businesses, to our citizens, our taxpayers. And we did exactly that. So when we came into legislative session in January, this was obviously before COVID had hit Tennessee and largely before it had hit the United States. We were looking at another year of some modest revenue surpluses, so collecting in more than we had projected, and also spending less than we had projected. We try to do that in Tennessee. We very conservatively managed state and have been for generations. And so what I actually wrote a letter to the editor, which you might have seen locally, but it talked about how we've prepared for a storm in Tennessee, and now the storm has arrived. And so I feel like we did that very, very well. So when COVID did come, rear its ugly head front and center, we immediately halted all legislative activity that was not budget related, that was not a core essential project. And we passed what was a very conservative bare bones budget to make sure that if we didn't come back all the way until June, and heaven forbid if we didn't make it to where we could pass a budget for the next fiscal year, that the essential functions of government were funded. So we did that as a stopgap preventative measure. Thank goodness we were able to come back before the end of the fiscal year and then fill in some of the gaps. And what we've now seen is that that was the right move, but also revenue collections have been higher than anticipated. So we're actually ahead of where we were this time last year with no pandemic, and we're certainly ahead of where we thought we would be on our budget projections. So not only has Tennessee grown in the pandemic more than it had, in the previous fiscal year, but we've also over collected from that kind of bare bones, worst case scenario revenue and cost projections. So Tennessee remains to be in a strong financial footing. That does not mean that every Tennessean is on a strong financial footing, and we certainly understand that. But first and foremost, if the government cannot be needy, right? If we can be self-sustaining and then not have to go to our taxpayers who are already struggling and say, we now need more than we needed before, that's really the best thing that we can do, right? Is to be a good steward of what's been given to us. So now looking at our, average citizens, obviously we've got a commitment. If we close down your business, for example, and one that I think really paints a picture, but there are others. If you are a self-employed hairstylist, or a barber or a beauty salon operator, as a self-employed person, you do not pay into the unemployment insurance fund. But because we as a state and we as a nation said you cannot come to work, for the first time we actually shut those businesses down. Then we had an obligation to then provide that unemployment insurance to those folks. And so for the first time across Tennessee, you had folks who were self-employed who were able to draw an unemployment check for that brief period of time. Now, we've seen those folks going back to work, thank goodness, in droves. and being able to restart their businesses. But this has been an unprecedented challenge. We can all Monday morning quarterback this thing. And what I've said from the very beginning is, look, in 5 years, we're all going to look silly because none of us have ever done this before. We will absolutely make mistakes and missteps. But, what my pledge has been to my constituents is we will always do our best to make the absolute best decision we can with the most accurate, up-to-date information that we have at the time, and then not be afraid to come back later and say we were wrong and now we've got to change the way we did this.
Well said. What legislative issue are you most passionate about, and how would it affect your district here in Maury County?
Yeah, thanks for asking. One thing that I'm very passionate about is looking at how much we spend at the Department of Corrections, for example, and on criminal justice at large. So we're at about $1.1 billion on corrections. If you look at the top 5 expenditures for the state of Tennessee, the first one's TennCare, which is a behemoth at about $12 billion. But on that list, number 5 on that list is the Department of Corrections, $1.1 billion. And the question that we should be asking ourselves is, what sort of a return on investment are we getting for that? And so I want to be very, very clear that when we talk about criminal justice reform, we're not talking about being soft on crime at all. What we're talking about is dividing out who we're mad at versus who we're afraid of. And if we can paint that picture clearly in our mind, then I think what we'll see is that we've got a lot of folks that are serving what seem to be very, very harsh sentences on things where if we could help them from a rehab and recovery standpoint, then we might get a much better return on our investment. So what we've heard from Tennesseans loud and clear is that they have a respect for law and order, that we want to make sure if somebody does wrong, that they pay a price for that. And I'll be the first one to say that's absolutely correct. But what we also hear from Tennesseans is that they're willing to help those who are willing to help themselves. And so once you've served your 4-year sentence, your 6-year sentence, your 8-year sentence, whatever that sentence is for the crime that you've committed, who you are when you get out of prison has as much to do with the programs and the opportunities that we allow you to engage in as it does with your own desire to get better. Some people don't want to get better. Some people want to be bad. We're always going to have a hard bed for those folks. But for folks who, like, for example, a young man that I mentor as part of the governor's volunteer mentorship initiative, served his sentence, was incarcerated in his early 20s, and now in his late 20s is coming out because he was able to participate in a bachelor's program while he was incarcerated, because he was able to work at a true wage job for actually a private employer while he was incarcerated. He had some money saved up. He paid back the state a portion of his room and board. He's paid his fines and fees into the victims fund that he's created. And he's able to take what little bit of nest egg he was able to build. And that way, when he was released, as he was back earlier this year, he was able to secure a place to live and to be able to continue his education so that he does not continue to be a burden on the state. Now, again, if he didn't want to get better, there's nothing that we can do as a General Assembly to solve that. And so if he wanted to continue to break the rules and break the law, then again, chances are he's going to become reincarcerated. But what we've got to remember is that 95% of the folks who are sitting in a Tennessee prison are getting out. They're not serving a life sentence. At some point, a judge and a jury have said, yes, this is bad, but at some point you will have paid your debt to society and you will be reentering society. And so the question is, who are they going to be when they get out? So that's something that I think impacts our district. I want to always heap as much praise as I possibly can on our sheriff, Bucky Rowland. Does an incredible job with this. He's one of the guys that really gets it. He's got a great team behind him as well. And so for maybe some of your viewers who don't know, if you've ever taken a look at our prison or our county jail system in Maury County, we've got one of the most forward-thinking sheriffs in education and rehab and rehabilitation in the state. And Maury County gets to see the benefits of that, right? Because if you've got somebody who can successfully reenter society and kick their habit for drug or alcohol or correct that behavior that they went in to begin with, then they're not coming back and they're not going to continue to be a burden on us as taxpayers. So that's something that I'm hugely passionate about. We want to make sure we get it right. What we're very, very aware of is that this is a very high stakes conversation. And so if we're not careful, we could we could mess up that could cost the state more money. It could create new victims. And so we want to make sure that we proceed, obviously, very deliberately and with caution, but it's a worthwhile discussion, because we know if we can help those folks reenter and get their lives back, then they won't be a burden on us, and they'll also be a productive member of society, which we know helps everybody.
Okay. Just a few more here. If a successful reelection, how do you intend to stay informed on matters of importance to your constituents?
Well, thank you. We're gonna continue doing what we've been doing, which is I try to spend at least a day, if not 2 days, in any given week in Murray County on the square in Columbia. I had breakfast there at Puckett's last Friday. I participate regularly in local radio and try to just stay on the ground and stay informed. As the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, I also make it a point to visit with judges, to visit with our district attorneys across the state, with our public defenders, with folks who work in the criminal justice system. Just a brief sidebar, when our communities grow, we think about building new infrastructure in forms of sewage and access to water and new neighborhoods and brick and mortar and curb and gutter and that sort of thing. What we often overlook is the growth that's required in other parts of our infrastructure, like the criminal justice system, for example. And so advocating for an additional judge in our judicial district, I think, is a huge need. I'm uniquely situated in that I have 3 different judicial districts across my district, and each of those is seeing a need for increased judges as their population is growing, and increased needs in law enforcement and so forth. So trying to stay connected to those communities and hearing what they're facing. Also doing things like participating with the Murray Alliance and candidate forums, and going to other events that you guys host. I try to do as much of that as possible. And then staying connected with our county mayors, with our city mayors, with our teachers and principals, and our school administrators. I think all that is really part and parcel to this job. This is truly a public service. This is something that we feel like you kind of pop out of your day job, so to speak, and you try to give of your talents and of your time as much as possible, so that you again can be served the way that you would want to be served as a member of the General Assembly. So I'll try to continue to do that, and keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening, across my district in Murray County, Hickman County, and Dixon County.
Right. Okay. Well, last question here. Just kind of a general, closing. Is there anything that you didn't get to that you were hoping we would ask you about, or any statements you want to leave everybody with today?
Well, I want to leave you with this. It's an honor to get to serve. I hope if you've ever contacted our office, I hope we've gotten back to you as quickly as possible. In 2020, it's been really a heightened focus on constituent services, as you might imagine. We've had a lot of folks calling the office trying to access their unemployment benefits, or if they're having an issue accessing state government because an office is closed for quarantine, or somebody's working remotely and they weren't able to get an answer as quickly as they otherwise would. So that kind of renewed focus on constituent services, I think, it's been healthy. It's been something that I've actually very much enjoyed. It's nice when somebody calls the office and I say, oh, I know them, or that's so-and-so's, first cousin, or I door knocked their house when I was campaigning. It really is an honor to get to serve those folks. And looking forward, I would say, don't forget, number one, to vote this November, a very critical election coming up. Also to fill out your census information if you haven't done that. We're about to go through district redistricting across Tennessee. That's not only our state house and Senate districts, it's also our congressional districts, and determines our representation in Congress. So right now you've got 2 representatives in Murray County in the state house. You've got Scott Sapicki, who represents the majority of Murray County. And then you've got myself that represents, again, this area kind of going out west, and also includes the square in Columbia. And so how those lines get redrawn after the census will impact what kind of access you've got to state government, and who your representative will be. And Murray County is growing in dynamic ways. So I would encourage you to get out and vote. I would encourage you to fill out that census information and stay informed. We always welcome folks to come to the Capitol. We have one of the most transparent websites in the state. In the country. We win awards every year for our transparency. And so if you can't come to Nashville, you can tune in and watch us on the General Assembly website. and stay informed with what's going on. We love hearing from our constituents. Again, it's an honor to get to serve you. And if I'm blessed to go back in January, I look forward to serving you for another 2 years.
Great. Well, thank you. And thanks for the plug on the census. That is very important. Well,
Absolutely.
Mike, I want to thank you for spending some time with your busy schedule with us today. I'm very appreciative. And for those of you who are watching this, I will remind you this is